that I have about the documentary, man, it was just old news, and they took a couple of with the footage from Puff from the days that's leading up him to get arrested, and the incidents with the people from the courts, you know, the two people from the courts. So it was nothing new.
This was not in the script, not in the rollout, not in anybody's prediction thread. Diddy didn't just respond to ** 50 Cent's documentary. He went completely off script. And the internet felt the jolt instantly. The kind of jolt where timelines freeze, group chats explode, and people start rewatching clips, like they missed a secret message hidden between the frames. Because documentaries are supposed to talk about people, not provoke them into jumping back into the ring. And yet here we are. What fans expected was silence, maybe a polished statement, maybe a lawyer-approved shrug. What they got instead felt raw, unexpected, and just chaotic enough to flip the entire narrative on its head. This wasn't damage control. This felt like disruption. The reaction was immediate. Memes sprinted before facts could catch up. Think pieces lined up like dominoes. And fans who thought they already had the story figured out suddenly realized they were only watching one angle of a much bigger chessboard. This move made other celebrity clapbacks look tame, like formal apology notes written in cursive. Here's the part that stunned everyone the most. This response didn't sound defensive. It sounded intentional, strategic, almost like someone deciding they were done being the subject and ready to become the narrator again. And when the subject of a documentary decides to grab the mic back, this moment didn't start with a microphone or a tweet. It started with expectation. When 50 Cent dropped his documentary, the internet treated it like a closing statement. Viewers pressed play, assuming the story would unfold in one direction, neatly packaged with a bow of finality. The tone felt settled before the credits even rolled. People were ready to judge, argue, and move on. What nobody planned for was the subject of the film stepping back into the frame and refusing to stay frozen in someone else's edit. That's exactly why Diddy's response landed like a drop plate in a quiet room. It wasn't loud in the traditional sense. It wasn't a screaming denial or a frantic rebuttal. It was something far more unsettling, a calm disruption. The kind that makes you wonder whether the person speaking knows something you don't, or whether they're daring you to look closer. Either way, the certainty people felt evaporated instantly. Timing mattered. The documentary hadn't finished rippling through public opinion yet. Think pieces were still drafting. Comment sections were still warming up. Memes were still picking their angles. And then, right in the middle of that digestion period, the response appeared. Not delayed. Not cautious. Present. That alone changed the power dynamic. When the subject responds before the narrative hardens, it fractures the mold before it sets. What unsettled fans most wasn't the content of the response, but the posture behind it. There was no panic, no scramble, no over-explaining. It felt deliberate, like someone choosing exactly which domino to tap without knocking the whole row down. That restraint sparked speculation immediately. Because in internet culture, restraint reads as confidence, and confidence invites suspicion. People began to rewatch the documentary with a different lens. Scenes that once felt definitive now felt selective. Editing choices suddenly stood out. The order of revelations felt intentional instead of inevitable. Viewers started asking questions they hadn't asked on the first watch, not because the film had changed, but because the context had. The response didn't erase the documentary. It complicated it. And complication is dangerous. The audience split fast. One camp accused Diddy of trying to muddy the waters, calling the move a distraction, designed to derail accountability. To them, responding at all was proof of discomfort. They argued that documentaries exist to expose patterns, not to host debates. Any engagement, they said, was an attempt to regain control of a narrative already decided. The other camp pushed back just as hard. They argued that no documentary, no matter how well produced, owns the entire truth. They said refusing to hear from the subject creates a false sense of finality. To them, the response didn't weaken the film. It reminded viewers that real people don't pause their lives when the credits roll. Reality keeps moving. That philosophical divide lit up timelines. This wasn't just about facts anymore. It was about who gets to speak when they get to speak, and how much weight their voice carries once a story has been framed. The response forced people to confront an uncomfortable question. Do we want explanations or do we want conclusions? Or do we want conclusions? Because those two things don't always coexist. Another layer bubbled up quickly: the history. Fans started pulling old interviews, jokes and jabs from years past. Lines that once felt playful suddenly looked pointed in hindsight. The long-running tension between the two figures stopped, feeling like background noise, and started feeling like foreshadowing. The documentary in that light looked less like a standalone project and more like one move in a longer chess match. That reframing changed how people talked about everything. Comment sections turned into debates about power, media, and timing. Some viewers admitted the response made them uncomfortable because it disrupted the clean narrative they'd already accepted. Others said discomfort was the point. They argued that stories involving influence and legacy should feel unsettled, not neatly resolved. The audience wasn't unified anymore. And unity is the enemy of virality. What also fueled the fire was what the response didn't include. There was no checklist of rebuttals, no itemized counterclaims, no attempt to litigate the documentary, scene by scene. Instead, there was implication, tone, selective engagement. The kind that invites interpretation rather than shuts it down. And once interpretation enters the room, speculation takes over. Speculation moves faster than truth. Media outlets sensed it immediately. Headlines multiplied. Analysts debated whether the move was smart or risky. Some called it a masterclass in reframing attention. Others warned it could backfire by extending the life of the documentary. But nobody called it forgettable. The story gained a second act without adding a single minute of footage. That's the irony. Silence would have let the documentary burn bright and then dim. Engagement turned it into a living argument, a live wire. Something people didn't just watch, but watched for. Every new appearance, every unrelated clip, every offhand comment suddenly felt relevant. The audience became alert, scanning for subtext. By the end of this phase, the documentary no longer stood alone. It had an echo. The response didn't settle the debate. It shifted it. Certainty cracked, curiosity rushed in, and curiosity doesn't leave quietly. It digs, rewinds, and waits. And waiting is dangerous, because when a story trains people to wait for the next move, it guarantees longevity. The narrative stopped being about what happened in the past and started being about what might happen next. That's when a film becomes a saga, and something about this moment made it clear to everyone watching. The mic had changed hands and the room wasn't done listening. Once the response went public, the internet didn't just react, it recalculated. Overnight, the documentary stopped being the main event and turned into the opening chapter of something messier, louder and way less predictable. People who thought they'd already formed solid opinions suddenly felt like the ground shifted under them. And nothing makes the internet more restless than uncertainty. Memes were the first wave, because memes always arrive before meaning. Jokes flooded timelines comparing this moment to a courtroom drama, where the defendant suddenly stands up mid-trial and addresses the jury directly. Others said this felt like a reality show reunion crashing into a documentary screening with zero warning. The sarcasm was brutal, the exaggeration outrageous, but underneath the humor was confusion. Fans weren't laughing because it was funny. They were laughing because the script had been flipped and nobody knew which scene came next. Public outrage split sharply into two camps, and neither side was quiet. One side accused Diddy of hijacking the narrative on purpose, saying the response was a calculated attempt to blur accountability and redirect attention. To them, responding at all was a power move, the kind meant to destabilize a story before it could fully settle into public judgment. They argued that documentaries are designed to expose patterns, not to host rebuttals, and that engaging only added noise where clarity was needed. The other side pushed back with equal force. They argued that documentaries, no matter how polished, are still edited perspectives. They said refusing to hear from the subject creates the illusion of final truth when real life is rarely that clean. To them, the response didn't erase the documentary. It complicated it, and complication felt more honest than certainty. This wasn't about defending anyone, they said. It was about recognizing that narratives aren't immune to challenge. That philosophical divide turned comment sections into battlegrounds. People weren't arguing about specific scenes anymore. They were arguing about power, media ethics, and who gets to speak once a story is framed. Does silence mean guilt, or does engagement mean manipulation? Every take felt personal because everyone watching projected their own beliefs about justice and control onto the situation. Then came the celebrity-adjacent reactions, and they only poured gasoline on the fire. No direct statements, no clear sides taken. Just subtle signals that fans dissected like coded messages. Like here. A vague caption there. Quotes about truth, timing, and narratives that felt suspiciously well-timed. The internet treated every emoji like it held secret meaning, even when it probably did, and single quotes d. Comparisons went completely off the rails. People said this felt like a rap industry version of a political scandal where the accused refuses to stay silent. Others joked that this moment made celebrity documentaries feel more like trailers than conclusions. The analogies were wild, but they stuck because emotionally the situation felt surreal. The audience wasn't sure whether they were watching an expose, a rebuttal, or the opening scene of a much larger showdown. What really escalated the chaos was how fast certainty began to wobble. Viewers who had confidently accepted the documentaries. Narratives started adding qualifiers to their opinions. If everything in the doc is accurate, assuming there's more context, I still believe it, but those pauses mattered. Certainty cracked, and cracks invite curiosity. Curiosity sent people digging. Old interviews resurfaced. Past jokes between the two figures were reframed as long-term tension instead of casual banter. Lines that once felt harmless suddenly looked like foreshadowing. The documentary stopped feeling like a standalone project and started feeling like one move in a long-running chess match that the public was only now paying attention to. The outrage grew louder not because people knew more, but because they knew less. The lack of resolution frustrated audiences who wanted a clean villain and a clear hero. Instead, they were left with two powerful figures, two massive platforms, and a narrative that refused to sit still. The story stopped being about the past and became about control in the present. Media coverage shifted in tone almost immediately. Headlines stopped declaring conclusions and started asking questions. Words like raises concerns and sparks debate replaced definitive language. That change signaled something important. The response had successfully destabilized the narrative, and instability keeps stories alive. Fans felt the shift deeply. They weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting. Waiting for another response. Waiting for clarification. Waiting for escalation. Every new appearance, every interview clip, every unrelated headline suddenly felt loaded with potential meaning. And that's when it became clear this wasn't about winning an argument. It was about momentum. The documentary had momentum, and the response disrupted it. Now the story belonged to no one fully. It floated in that dangerous space where speculation thrives and certainty dies. Conspiracy theories bubbled up. Extreme interpretations spread. The narrative stretched far beyond what either side likely intended. By the end of this phase, the outrage wasn't peaking, it was sustaining. The story had legs, layers, and one quality guaranteed to keep it alive online: unresolved tension. People stopped asking whether the documentary was right or wrong and started asking a much more dangerous question: what happens next? Because once a documentary gets answered instead of ignored, it stops being a statement. It becomes a conversation. And conversations, especially messy public ones, don't end quietly. The fallout didn't arrive with fireworks.
It arrived with a recalibration.
After the off-script response, the documentary stopped feeling like a verdict and started living like a question mark. Public opinion didn't collapse, it splintered. Before, viewers felt comfortable choosing a side and scrolling on.
After,
Diddy jumped back into the frame. Comfort vanished. Certainty fractured into camps, and camps don't dissolve quietly. They argue, they archive, And they wait. That waiting changed everything. What people felt most wasn't outrage, it was unease. Documentaries feel authoritative because they're edited to feel final. Music swells, chapters land, conclusions arrive on cue. But when the subject refuses to stay silent, the illusion breaks. Suddenly, the film feels less like a gavel and more like evidence in an ongoing case. Viewers weren't asking what the doc proved anymore. They were asking what it left out. And that shift from answers to gaps kept the story alive. Reputation took a quiet hit on both sides, just in different ways. For Diddy, responding reframed him from passive subject to active participant. To supporters, it read as confident someone, refusing to be boxed into an edit. To critics, it read as control someone trying to steer attention away from uncomfortable questions. Either way, one outcome was guaranteed: he would not be ignored. Silence might have let the film dominate. The cycle and fade. Engagement split the spotlight and stretched the timeline. For 50 Cent, the documentary gained a second life. What could have been a one-directional statement turned volatile, reactive, and current. Volatility is sticky. It keeps audiences checking back. It turns a release into a saga. The film didn't lose relevance. It gained a shadow. And shadows move with you. The industry watched closely. Because this moment wasn't just celebrity drama, it was a media case study. Who owns a narrative when the subject refuses to remain silent? Does a response legitimize a film or dilute it? Is silence strength, or is engagement the sharper weapon? These questions rippled beyond fans into press strategy, future docs, and how public figures prepare for exposure in the age of instant rebuttal. Creators took notes. Because the lesson was uncomfortable but clear. Silence isn't always the safest move, and speaking isn't always the smartest. Both carry risk. Both can backfire. The response didn't end the conversation. It transformed it into something unstable. And instability is the one thing the internet feeds on without ever getting full. Fans felt that instability immediately. Every unrelated headline felt relevant. Every interview clip felt loaded. Body language became evidence. Tone became text. People didn't just consume anymore, they monitored. Once an audience starts monitoring, a story never truly ends. It mutates. Even fatigue couldn't kill it. Some people said they were tired of hearing about it and clicked anyway. That's the paradox of unresolved tension. Exhaustion doesn't shut it down, it simmers. The story lingered as a reference point, a shorthand, a cautionary example in debates about documentaries. Accountability and power. The biggest consequence wasn't cancellation or redemption. It was uncertainty. Uncertainty about how truth gets constructed when editing meets ego. Uncertainty about whether documentaries reveal reality or curate it. Uncertainty about whether responding is bravery or brinkmanship. And uncertainty is the oxygen of online culture. It guarantees longevity. That longevity came with a cost.
Every
future move now exists in this story's gravity. Every silence feels intentional. Every word feels strategic. The response bent the spine of the narrative and left pages loose, ready to be added, reframed, or torn out depending on what comes next. Fans knew it. Media knew it. And both sides knew the audience was waiting. Waiting for escalation. Waiting for clarification. Waiting for the next unexpected move, because once a documentary gets answered instead of ignored, it stops being a monument to the past and becomes a live wire in the present. The story doesn't conclude, it listens. It hums. It dares someone to touch it again. That's the real aftermath. Not a winner. Not a loser. Not closure. But a permanent shift in how the story lives from something people watch to something people now watch for. And in internet culture, that's the most dangerous place a narrative can exist. Alright, if you're still here, don't act surprised. You just watched a documentary turn into a live power play. This wasn't a quiet response. This wasn't a PR-approved shrug. This was someone going off script and flipping the entire conversation on its head. And now the internet doesn't know whether to argue, rewatch, or brace for the next move. So let's lock this in. First. Mash that like button like it owed you money and thought you'd forget about it. Likes tell the algorithm you want real breakdowns, real tension, And stories that don't end when the credits roll or the comment sections cool off. Second, drop a comment right now. No safe takes, no both sides, cop-outs. Did Diddy responding change how you saw the documentary, or did it confirm everything you already believed? Was this confidence, calculation, or straight-up chaos? Say it with your chest. The comment section is where the real debate actually happens. Third, subscribe. Not because I'm begging, but because, let's be honest, scandals don't disappear. They reload. If you want the analysis before narratives get cleaned up, rewritten, or buried under PR statements, this is exactly where you need to be. This channel doesn't whisper. We don't accept one version of the story. And we don't pretend power. Play stop at the credits. Receipts resurface. Silence speaks. And when two giants clash in public, the fallout never lands quietly. Turn on notifications. Stay locked in. Keep watching closely, because if you think this off-script moment stunned fans, just wait until the next move